Happy December, Sword Family. Welcome to the Teahouse. This week we're drinking Celestial Sensations Wild Berry Zinger. Yeah. Pretty good. Little aftertaste. Kind of odd, but this week we are going to be talking about push hands as well as Wing Chun Chi Sao. Now, most people associate push hands with Tai Chi Chuan, which is entirely valid, but push hands actually exists in multiple different internal styles. There is Tai Chi push hands, there is Bagua push hands. Most of the internal styles have their own version of the exercise. So why do we do push hands? Well, push hands is a tactile expression of the things that you're supposed to be learning in your class. It is meant to overcome the body's natural desire to push against. Push hands is meant to teach you to flow with. Most people, myself included, when there's something pushing against them, their natural inclination is to try and push back. This is not always the greatest of ideas. Sometimes, and especially for someone like myself who's not entirely muscular or strong, it's actually better to not push against them. There have been 3 times in my life where I had to fight someone who was bigger and stronger than me. And every single time, at first, I try to meet force with force. And it didn't turn out well most of the time. The first time, I was probably 14 years old. And I was heading to my morning gym class in junior high. And there was a group of other young men standing in the hallway at the end of the hall where the gym was. And one of them decided that he just didn't like me. And so he told another member of the group that I said something about him. So he came over and, grabbed my shirt and was pushing me up against the wall. And at first I tried to push back because, granted, I was taller than he was, but he was decidedly stronger than me. And he had me pinned against the wall. I didn't really have a whole lot of choice in what to do in the situation. And his friends were over at the other end of the hall laughing and being jerks. And this was before I had taken any official martial art classes. I didn't start Mantis until I was probably 16. So this was a good 2 years before that. And for some reason, something in my brain told me to stop pushing. It told me, he wants to go that way. Let him go that way. So I stopped pushing against him. And instead, the next time he let up, stopped pushing pressure, I just turned. I turned to the side, and he ran face first into the brick wall behind me. And then it kind of devolved because, there were other people involved, and I ended up on the ground wrestling with him. And then someone from the lunchroom, which was right next door, came out and pulled us apart and called the principal. And as he was being pulled off of me, he kicked me in the spine. But that was the very first time that I had some inkling about stop trying to meet force with force. It's not always the proper application. And that is exactly what push hands teaches you. It teaches you to flow with movement. Push hands is a 2-person exercise. You can't really, you can do push hands by yourself, but it's not really effective in teaching you what you're supposed to be learning. You need to have an opponent. You need to have someone opposite you that's meeting your movements, and you flow together. Now, I showed this book before. This is Tai Chi Push Hands. And right over here, Tai Chi Tui Shou, Tai Chi Push Hands, by Dr. Yang Jwing-Ming and David Grantham. If you do not have a Tai Chi school nearby and you want to learn push hands, get this book. It's not terribly expensive, and it goes through all of the different movements in Tai Chi push hands, excuse me, because they're not all the same. If you've seen push hands in a movie or something, it's generally 2 people standing probably a short distance apart. You have one person. They're both doing the same thing. You place one hand on the inside of your elbow, and your other hand is contacting the other person right around the wrist. And you're going to push and retract. And they're going to do the same. You go one direction, you go the other direction. Always in circles. Now, that's only one particular style of push hands. You can also go up this way and change direction that way. You can go diagonally, change direction that way. There's lots of different ways to do it. And this book is going to tell you most of them. The difference between most styles of push hands, Tai Chi push hands, Bagua push hands, is going to be in the leg movements. Tai Chi push hands, for the most part, don't move. They might move forward and back a little bit, but it's mostly done in the upper body. That's not always 100% true, obviously. Nothing is 100%. Bagua push hands is going to be like most Bagua forms. You're going to be circle walking while you're doing it. If you're not already a Bagua student, if you're not already well-versed in circle walking, don't try and do Bagua push hands, because you're just going to confuse yourself. Because you're going to be walking in a circle while your hands and arms are moving in a circle. And if they're moving in opposite directions, if your upper body is going clockwise and your lower body is going counterclockwise, you're probably going to trip yourself up and you might possibly fall and hurt yourself. But the entire point of push hands is to unlearn an entire lifetime of meeting force with force. That is the biggest difference between external and internal styles. External styles, Shaolin styles, want you to meet force with force. Many, many years ago, when I very first got this apartment, I had a Wing Chun wooden man. It was given to me as a gift. I ended up giving it away as a gift because it wasn't really my style. But I think last stream we talked about the 3-point block that most people associate with that wooden man. You have 3 arms, 2 here and 1 down here, and you stripe the wooden man, forearm up here, and then go down, both arms, 1, 2, 3. You're strengthening the bones and the muscle in your forearm so that you can block force against force. It also was generally decorated around this time of year with Christmas lights because it wasn't being used for its intended purpose. Hence why I gave it away. But I realized fairly early on that that's not the way that I fight. That's not the way that I want to do things. Since that first encounter in junior high, then at 16, I started learning Mantis, which is also an external form. You're doing a lot of hooking and grabs. And while I honestly do cherish that time with my first Shifu, that's not the way that I fight. So the other couple of times that I have been in situations where I needed to stop my body's natural desire to meet force with force have always been situations where I am in public, always, and I don't want to end up in the adult version of the principal's office like I did the first time, so I will try and neutralize as quickly as possible. Now, the second time, I was walking into a grocery store, and someone that I have a bit of history with decided he was going to essentially shoulder check me while simultaneously short range punching me in the stomach. Now, he had done this previously to my brother-in-law. So I had an inkling that this might occur. So as soon as I felt that initial contact with his shoulder, I, again, just like the first time, rolled to the side so that his punch to the stomach barely brushed. I grabbed his wrist, and since he was walking forward, I just continued the momentum, and he stumbled over my foot, and I just kept walking into the store. I didn't acknowledge the contact or anything because I knew that would start something, and I didn't have the spoons to deal with him that day, so I just was like, I'm just done. But that kind of thing is exactly what push hands is designed to teach you. Is your opponent wants to go that way? Let them go that way. Don't try and meet force with force. Sometimes it's better to let the force continue. Use the opponent's momentum against them. Now, recently, I have found push hands competitions on YouTube and various other websites, and to me, this is not push hands. Now, this is my personal opinion. You might have a different opinion, but most of what I have seen as far as competitions go is these people doing the exact opposite of what they're supposed to be doing. They're not flowing with the opponent. They're trying to meet force with force. It basically turns into a sumo match of you trying to push the other person out of the box or off the platform. That's not what push hands is supposed to be. You're supposed to be flowing with the other person. You're supposed to be accepting their movement and letting it flow through you or around you. These competitions are men and women standing, pushing against each other, trying to force the other person. It's force against force. It's pushing against the other person instead of flowing with them. Push hands is meant to teach against that. It's meant to rewire your brain so that when someone pushes against you, you accept that. I don't particularly like seeing these competitions because, as I said at the very beginning, push hands is meant as a tactile expression of what you're learning in the Tai Chi form. Tai Chi is fluid. It's circular. You're moving your body in a fluid motion. You're not pushing against another force. It goes entirely contrary to what push hand is supposed to be. Now, I am not a master. I don't accept that title. People have tried to use it, and I just tell them, no, thank you. I am a student. I've been a student since I was 16 years old. That's been more than half my life. Almost 30 years I've been a student. I'm still learning. So if there's other people out there who think that these competitions are what push hands is supposed to be, then come and discuss it. I want to understand why you believe that this is what push hands is supposed to be. That's the whole point of this channel, is discussion. That's why it's called the Teahouse. I talked about it in my very first stream. It's from the Jet Li movie Fearless, where Jet Li's character Huo Yunjia and a Japanese master are sitting and discussing different grades of tea. And Huo Yunjia remarks that, I don't care about the quality of tea. If it tastes good, does it serve the purpose of quenching my thirst? And that's all that matters. Excuse me. And then they kind of move that discussion into different styles of martial arts, and why do you compete, and why do you... I will put that scene in the description later. If you haven't seen it, it was in the chat in my very first live stream, but I'll do it again. That's how I feel about martial arts as a whole. You're not competing against the other style. You're learning from them. One of my favorite MMOs is Jade Empire. At the very beginning of the game, you're sparring against another student and you beat them. And one of the dialogue options is basically to tell them that, you know, every bruise is a lesson. Every single person that I have fought, every single person that I have sparred against, I was a student of theirs. I was learning from them. That's the way I look at things. This channel is meant to foster those kinds of discussions. If you think that Tai Chi push hands should basically be the Chinese equivalent of sumo wrestling, then you can come over here and you can discuss it with us. We discuss in the Teahouse. This is not for fighting. This is not for combat. Leave that to Lei Tai matches. Now, the other thing that we're supposed to discuss here is Qisao, which is not exactly the same as push hands. It is a Wing Chun exercise, but it has a similar understanding. Again, it's a two-person exercise, and you start standing a distance apart, just like with push hands, but instead, the opponent's wrist is against your wrist. Both hands. Qisao is the Cantonese translation of sticky hands. Again, the point is to have a tactile understanding of the things you're learning in the Wing Chun form. You're feeling the movement of your opponent, and you're going to flow with it. It's basically the same thing. Well, okay, now it's basically similar idea of push hands, but in an external style. Now, the thing that I personally like about Wing Chun is it's one of those styles that kind of toes the line between internal and external. It is because a lot of what you're doing is similar to those internal styles where you're using the opponent's momentum against them. But you also have hard blocks against forearms. So it's still an external style, but with some internal components to it. If you've done push hands and you decide you want to try a different style, then go to Wing Chun. If you want, if you want to stay in the internal family and you've done Tai Chi, try Bagua, try Xing Yi. But if you want an external style to complement your internal style, then Wing Chun is a very good choice because it has a lot of the same principles as internal styles, but with an external flair to them. Most of your Wing Chun forms are going to be very, very simple and repetitive, especially when compared to a lot of other forms. If you've ever seen a Tai Chi form, they're very fluid from one motion to the next, going down the line. Wing Chun is very static. It is a close quarter style. So a lot of the forms are going to be mostly done with the upper body. Your lower body is mostly rooted to the ground. You're standing, and everything is done with the arms and the elbows. And it's, as I said, very simple and repetitive. You'll do a group of movements with your right hand and then repeat with your left hand and then do them with both hands. It's mostly memorizing the movements of your arms and wrists and things like that. But anyone who's seen Wing Chun in combat knows that it is just as fluid, just as beautiful as any other Asian style of fighting. Go watch the Donnie Yen Ip Man movies. Those movies, Donnie Yen trained with one of Ip Man's children to learn Ip Man's style of fighting. So a lot of the fight scenes in those movies, there's 4 of them. I think there's a 5th one they're supposed to be working on, even though he said he was done after 4. The fight scenes in those, he is using actual Wing Chun. It's not like a lot of kung fu movies with a lot of wires and flying around and stuff. He's actually using Wing Chun. Now, as I said, I had a wooden man, and I tried when I was first given the wooden man as a gift. And I found out that that's just not That's just not the way I do things. But if it works for you, please come over to this channel and discuss it. I would love to talk to someone who's been doing Wing Chun as long as I've been doing my style. I have only spoken to 3 other people, and they also had just barely started. So my idea of Wing Chun, my experience with it, is fairly limited. I have sparred against other internal practitioners. I have sparred against my original Shifu during doing Mantis. I've had a little bit of opportunity to spar with people using European styles. I want to improve my martial education, so to speak. Now, one question that I get asked fairly often is, can you apply push hands and Shisao with a weapon? The answer is obviously yes. You're doing the same thing, just without your hand. For instance, if you're sword fighting with, excuse me, if you're sword fighting with someone and you feel their blade come into contact with yours, you don't have to bind their blade. You don't have to push against the blade. As soon as you feel that contact, you can let it roll off one direction, the other direction. You turn the blade so that it brushes past. You coordinate moving the weapon and your body so that it brushes completely past you. You can do it. Dog. You can do it with longer weapons. You just need to develop the ability to feel through the weapon when that other blade comes in contact with yours and feel that pressure. Hi, baby. If you feel a weapon coming in contact with yours when you don't have the leverage to push against them, then the best thing you can do is redirect. Hush, baby. I'm trying to stream here. Go on. With all weapons, you're going to have a strong and you're going to have a weak. The strong of the weapon is going to be closest to your hand. If, grab my piercers here. If you have someone who's pushing strong against strong, you're not going to get a whole lot of movement. But if their strong comes against your weak, which is towards the tip of the blade, it slides right off. Even weak against weak, it's going to slide. Now, if their strong is against your weak, you're not going to have the leverage to push back against that. So the best thing you can do in that situation is to just let it slide. They want to go that way, let them go that way. And that is true for swords, it is true for staffs, it is true for any kind of martial weapon. You're going to have a strong, a weak. And anytime something comes in contact with the weak of the blade, you don't have the leverage to push back against them. Strong against strong, you could sit all day long and it's not going to move. But you do not need to push against. If that's the way you fight, more power to you. Enjoy. But for those of us who fight internally, who fight softly, the best thing you can do in almost any situation when you're met with force is let it flow past you. Do not push if you don't need to. Because I guarantee you, doesn't matter how big you are, doesn't matter how strong you are, doesn't matter how long you trained, eventually you're going to find someone who's bigger, who's stronger, who has trained longer, and your pushing against them is going to be futile. Sometimes we just need to, as Bruce Lee liked to say, flow like water. Water can fit in any size container. It can move swiftly. It can move slowly. It can create life. It can destroy life. Water is probably one of the best representations of the Tai Chi tool, or the Tai Chi symbol, or as most people know it, the yin-yang symbol. Because water has the capacity to create, it has the capacity to destroy. It's a pretty good representation of that symbol. There is a reason that that symbol is associated with Tai Chi. Because it is all about duality. It is all about having both sides. Light and dark, good and evil, male and female. To be whole, to be complete. And there's no one here, besides me and Foxy. I'm just rambling. But it's my channel. So, we've discussed push hands. We've discussed a little bit of Teahouse. And discussed how it's possible to implement these things with more than just your hand. You can do it with any part of your body. You know, if someone walks up to you and gets in your face and presses their forehead against yours and is just screaming in your face, don't try and push against their skull if you don't have to. Just roll with it. You would be surprised at how often that works. All right, let's see. What else can we discuss for 20 minutes? No questions in the chat. So I think that we can go into a little bit more in depth about some of the times that I have had to implement not pushing against. Now, this also applies outside of a martial context. It also can apply to conversation. It can apply to fighting with your spouse or significant other. Sometimes, excuse me, you're going to come up against a situation where both of you, whether it's a friend, a lover, boss, you're going to come up against a situation where you're both pushing against each other in conversation, in philosophy. And sometimes the best thing you can do is stop pushing back. There are people out there whose entire life revolves around just getting a rise out of you. They just want to get a reaction. They just want to push you until you snap. And in those situations, the best thing you can do is stop pushing. I had another encounter with someone once. They were of the opinion that I had been talking shit about them, and they decided they were going to come confront me about it. And I had not said anything about this person. I didn't even know them. I'm pretty sure they were drunk and just wanted to fight. And at first, I was trying to push back. I don't know you. I didn't say anything. And it didn't matter. He just wanted to keep pushing. So eventually, I stopped pushing back. And I just let him scream and yell and do whatever he needed to do. And eventually, because he wasn't getting the reaction he was expecting, he walked away. He ran out of steam, and that was the end of that. So if you find yourself in a situation like that, stop pushing. Stop reacting. You don't have to give in, but stop reacting. The natural inclination of everyone is to meet force with force, to push back. Sometimes that's the wrong thing to do. You don't need to push and push until someone snaps and then fists are thrown and then you possibly end up in handcuffs. It is not necessary to always meet force with force. Sometimes the best thing to do when met with resistance is to stop resisting. This kind of goes more into martial philosophy than actual martial arts. But that's also part of this channel, so we can talk some philosophy. Debate is not always the proper response. If you both are 100% sure of your correctness, of your truth, and you're just pushing back against them and they're pushing, eventually someone is going to have to stop pushing. Now, I used to do, as I've mentioned probably a couple of times, I used to do boffer, which is foam and duct tape covered weapons. And you go out to, I don't know, the park or wherever, and you beat each other with your foam covered PVC swords. And I had been doing internal martial arts by this point for quite some time. So most of the people that I fought against, number one, had no actual style. They were flailing around, just swinging, and not really, there wasn't really any style behind them. But they were also the kind of person to rush right at you. And more than once, because of the way that I fight, and because of the way that Foxy fights, because I was the one who first started teaching her, this did not end well for them. Hang on. Be right back. Knock at the door. I thought it was my dinner, but it wasn't. So, last 12 minutes here, I'm going to tell a couple of little stories to kind of try and emphasize what we've been talking about so far. So, we fight in this big local park, and one day we kind of decided that after the official meeting was over that we wanted to continue playing, and our group, our house, and the two best fighters there, who also just happened to be the people who were running everything, decided they were going to spar with us. So we played around for, I don't know, probably 20 minutes, maybe half an hour. And at the end of things, one of the opponents decided to come up to me and critique the way that I was fighting, telling me that I didn't need to be afraid, that I needed to engage, that I needed to push against. That's not how I fight. That's not the kind of swordsman that I am. The biggest problem that most people had when I was boffering is that I was passive. I wouldn't just run right into a big group of people swinging wildly and trying to hit somebody in the head, which with that group of people happened fairly often. Even though headshots were supposed to be banned, it happened all the time. It happened on my very first day, probably twice. I am a passive fighter. I will sit and wait for you to move before I react. Excuse me. And my king at the time didn't say anything back, and then we left, and I came back home, and he called me and said, don't take it personally, and blah, blah, blah. And I just flat out told him, I don't care what he thinks. I don't give a damn what he thinks about the way I fight. How many times on that battlefield, and this is a direct quote, how many times on that battlefield were me and Foxy the last ones of our house left standing? It happened all the time. Because everyone else, and I mean everyone else, not just our group, but everyone else there was the type to just rush in swinging wildly, and we sat back and waited. We sat back and observed. We waited to see what the other person was going to do, and we reacted. Another time, we were playing Capture the Flag. Now, this time, it didn't end up being our house versus another house. They kind of had everyone dodgeball style. You'd have a captain, and the captain would pick teams. And obviously, the leader of our group picked all of his house and then scattered other people from other houses until we had a complete team. And I don't remember exactly how we made or found or had flags. That's not really an important part of this story. But our captain picked me and Foxy and his wife to protect our flag while the rest of the team went to capture the other person's flag. Yeah, see, she remembers. A lot of people remember this day. I'm surprised you don't hear her laughing in the background because this is a fairly entertaining story. So, like most games of Capture the flag is obviously to go collect the other team's flag and bring it back to your flag. Now, what most people didn't think about, or at least I don't think they thought about it a whole lot, was the particular park that we were playing in that day, which was different from the park from the other story, was an incline. The other team's flag was on top of the hill. Our flag was on bottom of the hill. Me, Foxy, and the other woman protecting our team's flag. Anyone who's ever tried running downhill knows once you're going, it's really difficult to stop. We didn't pick the bottom of the hill by accident. We did it on purpose. Use the opponent's momentum against them. Yeah, see, momentum was in our favor. There was one person running towards our flag from the top of the hill. They didn't start running once they got halfway down the hill or once they got close to our flag. They started running from the top of the hill. One person was running towards our flag And me, Foxy, and this other woman were standing single file in a line. And, excuse me. I was in front, Foxy behind me, the other woman behind her. He ran straight at us. And I took my big fudge sickle of a bopper sword because it had the PVC, the insulation, and then it had another layer of insulation wrapped around the outside. So it was twice as thick as it is now. I still have the sword. I took my big fudge sickle of a sword. Oh, that's right. Foxy was at the very end. But regardless, I took my sword, turned to the side, hit him in the stomach because he couldn't stop. He kept running past me, got hit by the girl behind me, kept running past her, got hit by Foxy, hit the sidewalk, and pardon my French, but went, all right, fuck, I'm dead. So there you go. Use the momentum against them. If I would have tried to meet his force with mine, he was running downhill. He would have just run right over top of me. Instead, I just turned and whack. And I didn't even really hit him that hard. I didn't have to. I more just took and just kind of held it, and he ran into it full force. I'm surprised it didn't knock the wind out of him. So there you go. Sometimes the right course of action is to not meet force with force. If the force pushing on you is greater than the force you are going to exert, don't push against it. Keep yourself level and just don't push. All right. We've been almost at an hour. Oh, hey, Kevin. Oh, tell me now, don't say hi. Well, hi anyway. Show up at the very end. Shame on you. We've had a very interesting ramble tonight. Okay. There's no one here to really ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I have not decided yet if I'm going to have another stream this month. 2 weeks from today, 2 weeks from today is going to be the 23rd of December. 2 days before Christmas. I do not know if I'm going to feel like sitting here rambling about whatever is on my mind that day. It's too late to have any kind of discussion about possible presence for the martial artist in your life. So I think I might just skip that day, but I might not. We're going to have to see how I feel when things get closer to time to have that stream. So if the 2 people that are watching here today have any ideas of things that we can discuss for the 2 days before Christmas, I will gladly take suggestions. But for now, we've made it to our hour. I have pretty much said the things that I feel need to be said. Chinese holiday traditions. We could maybe do that. I'd have to do a little bit more research because the one that I know of is the Chinese holiday tradition of going to KFC on Christmas Day. But I have 2 weeks to research. That's not a bad idea. We might be able to do a little bit of that and maybe talk a little bit about Christmas with a martial artist in your life. If you have low ceilings, maybe don't. But yeah, we've hit our hour. I am mostly out of tea. I have a Amazon box to deliver to Foxy, so we're gonna say good night, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Hana Kwanzaa to everyone, and 再见。